for you here in the notes. All right, if you want to look at your notes, Daniel chapter 9. It says in Daniel 9, chapter 9, verse 24, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and for your holy city to do these things: to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, in the book of Daniel, Daniel defines what this terminology of a week is. The Hebrew word for week is like our word for dozen. It could be a dozen donuts. It could be a dozen decades. It could be a dozen military squadrons. So it means 7 of something. And in the book of Daniel, it means 7 years. So 70 sevens, or 490 years, have been determined for your people. That is the correct understanding.
You mean 490 weeks?
490 years. 70 sevens of years. A week in the book of Daniel is a 7-year period.
Okay.
Just like if I were to say 6 dozen, you'd think of 72. This is 70 sevens, and it represents 7-year periods, or 490 years.
So is this a kind of just a bad interpretation of
What?
the Hebrew word when they put weeks?
No, it's a literal interpretation. And then you have to interpret it. And that's the way the New American Standard chooses to do things. I don't know if the NIV would say. I don't know that the NIV would say 77-year periods, because that would make a theological statement also.
What about just 77s?
Yeah, well, you can decide how you want to interpret it or translate it. But the New American Standard used the term weeks. Pardon me? Yeah, 77s. Uh-huh.
Did you ever get a chance to look at like a dynamic translation, what they translated as?
Well, that would be like the NIV's a dynamic equivalency, 77s.
What about the more, what was that other one that, like the good news, or...
Yeah. Again, there's implications as to how you translate it, because it implies one's view of eschatology.
I'm just curious.
Right. No, I haven't looked at all the... And the message is pathetic, only because it's not a translation. It's a pathetic perversion.
It's so fun.
So, let me not get off the track. I've got so much to cover tonight. 70 weeks, or 77s, 490 years have been decreed for your people to do 6 things. Now, just by way of information, the first 3 were accomplished at the first coming of Christ. The next 3 will be accomplished at the second coming of Christ. 77s have been decreed for your people and for your holy city. First of all, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, and to make atonement for iniquity. You can argue that in the redemption of Christ, he completed the first 3. Then, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up or complete the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place will happen at his second coming. Verse 25, so you are to know and to discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks, or 49 years, and 62 weeks, or 400 and, what is that?
83.
Pardon me?
83.
Yeah, 483. No, 62 times 7. See, I'm not even thinking. 14, carry 1. 434.
432.
434.
Maybe.
434. So you've got 49 years and 434 years, which is a total of 483 years. So until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks, 49 years, and 62 weeks, or 434 years. It, meaning Jerusalem, will be built again with plaza moat even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. Verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, 1 7-year period. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abomination will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete desolation, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So, there's a 7-year period left. In the middle of that 7-year period, there is this abomination of desolation. And at the end, the one who has committed the abomination of desolation will be desolated. Now, let me just put some... maybe a couple of overheads up here to see if we can't make the sense of this a little bit more. Is that focused enough? All right. Think of a stopwatch where you've got 490 units on the stopwatch. During the first 7 weeks, or 49 years, is the period when Jerusalem is rebuilt. Then, for the next 62 weeks, or 434 years, which is a total of 483 years, that is when Messiah comes. Then it says Messiah is cut off and has nothing. Then there is a time gap. Then it says there is this last 7-year period. This 7-year period begins with the making of a covenant. It says, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. So it begins with the making of a covenant. In the middle of the covenant, or in the middle of the 7-year period, or the 3.5 weeks, he stops the sacrifices and the grain offerings. He commits an abomination, and he brings desolation and destruction on the people. Then at the end of that 7-year period, the desolator is desolated or destroyed. That is the prophetic timetable that we have from the book of Daniel. Now let me put this up there to try to provide further definition. Okay. Here is from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah comes. There will be 49 years and there will be 434 years. During the first 50 years, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, the 20th year of Artaxerxes, the month of Nisan, March 14th, 445 BC, Xerxes, or Artaxerxes, issued the decree for Nehemiah to go back and to rebuild Jerusalem. And that took 49 years for them to build the walls, to build the moat, and to bring it under security. Then it says, for 434 more years, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince comes, there will be 483 years. Now, the person who's done all the work on this is Dr. Harold Honer in his book, Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ. Sir Robert Anderson did some preliminary work. But if you start at March 4th, 445 BC, and you take 483 years times 360, because the Jews were on the lunar year, not the solar year. You come up with 173,880 days. When you count from the Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, the 20th year of Xerxes, and then you count forward, you come to April 6, 32 AD, the very day of the triumphal entry of Jesus Christ, offering himself as Messiah. Okay? And we'll maybe have time to look at the passage, but you remember in Luke chapter 19, Jesus says to them, if you had known this day, the day of your visitation. And so this prophecy of Daniel laid out everything that brings us up to Messiah. Now, Messiah is cut off, which is a terminology of being executed. He has nothing, and then there was this gap period. The scriptures still say that there is this 1 week, 7-year period in the future. That it begins with the prince who will affirm a covenant. In the midst of the week, he breaks the covenant with the abomination of desolation. And then at the end, Messiah returns and desolates the desolator and destroys him. Those people who believe in a future tribulation are people who believe that there is still this 1 week in Israel's prophetic calendar that is out there waiting to be fulfilled in the nation of Israel. And again, it's like a stopwatch. Click. Nehemiah, Artaxerxes, issues the decree. Tick, 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 tick. 49 years, Jerusalem's built. 483 years, Messiah comes. Messiah is rejected and cut off. Click. It stops. It starts again with the issuing of confirming of a covenant. Click. It starts. 3.5 years, he turns his back on the Jews and betrays them and desolates the temple and commits the abomination of desolation. After 7 years, Jesus Christ comes back, and the desolator is desolated and destroyed by Christ. And of course, the he who makes the covenant is the Antichrist. So this is the broad framework that Daniel gives us of the prophetic calendar for Israel. It's probably, to me, the most phenomenal singular prophecy in the Old Testament. Yes, it's difficult to calculate the days, and some you can see say it's March 14th, others say no, it was March 15th, one day on this side and one day on that side. But Daniel is predicting this, in 560, 570 BC, 130 years before the prophecy begins. And then you go 483 years, or 173,880 days, and it comes to the very day that Jesus, or within the very week, if you're not going to believe the very day. I believe it was the very day because God's controlling it. How you set those parameters is difficult. But to the very day when Jesus offers himself as the Messiah and pronounces the judgment upon him because they missed the day of their divine visitation. Josephus refers to Daniel as creating messianic fervor or messianic anticipation. The problem is they didn't know when to start the stopwatch, or they hadn't been keeping track of the calendar. But definitely Daniel chapter 9 was within the framework of the messianic anticipation of the Jewish people in the days of Jesus. And so he fulfills that. Now, the most important thing for us is this last 7-year period, because the gospel writers are going to refer to it. So, questions about Daniel's 70 weeks? Yes?
Just for me to get a clarification.
Yep.
From Xerxes to when Jesus is cut off, that's the
483 years. 173,880 days.
Now, he's cut off, meaning
Executed,
okay.
rejected.
And went to the cross. And everything.
Right.
Then
Yep.
from that time to the 7 year is, quote unquote, the time we're in now.
Right, church age.
But we don't know what that time
Don't
is.
know how long it is.
But we do know that then when the time does come to an end,
Right.
that starts the 7 year.
We know that when, as it says, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and he, and we believe that to be the Antichrist, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. So when the Antichrist makes that firm covenant, or confirms that peace covenant that we're going to see from the Gospels and from 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, when he affirms or confirms that covenant, then the stopwatch starts again, and there's 7 more years left for Israel. Now, people have mistakenly made the correlation that the rapture of the church begins the tribulation. No, it doesn't. The rapture of the church removes the church so that the transitional time can set up the beginning of the last 7 years. But there could be a few years, a few months, there could be a decade in between the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation.
So when the Antichrist makes that covenant, the church will still be here.
Church is gone.
Okay.
Has to be gone.
All right.
Well, unless you're mid-tribulationist or post-tribulationist, and we're going to look at that this evening. So, the main thing is to see that there is a 7-year period here that is believed to be yet in the future. Now, let's turn our attention. Let me just show you this one. This one might help clarify things too. 7 weeks or 49 years to build Jerusalem. 62 weeks or 434 years until Messiah comes. Then there is the mystery that is talked about in the New Testament, not having been previously revealed, that tells us of the church age. We have the rapture of the church. Christ comes, he must rapture the church prior to the 70th week, because the 70th week is a time of God's judgment upon the world we will see. And that's the climax of Jewish history, which then, after the tribulation period, leads us into the millennial kingdom. Yes?
Do we get copies of those 2 charts?
Probably.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ben, and then Leanne.
I was going to say, you talked about how this Daniel's prophecy had created fervor among the people, Josephus says. And, I mean, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but is it possible that they could have had a pretty close idea, considering the fact that the building of the temple, or the building of Jerusalem, was a pretty huge deal that would have kind of marked it as...
Well, you mean the expansion under Herod?
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about as you try to add up the 442 years, as they look back, you know, where the time started, you'd think that when they realized
Right.
that
See,
the building of
right.
Jerusalem was a pretty big
Yes.
monumental time.
Right, the time of Nehemiah.
Right, and so
Right.
wouldn't they be able to calculate it in some
Well-
way and be pretty close, at least to knowing that within the next few years?
They were very, there was a messianic fervor, or as he would call a deliverer fervor amongst the people, as they would put things together.
So then, how does a Jewish person today look at these prophecies? Do they, you know, what is their viewpoint on
Generally
prophecy in
speaking,
general?
they don't look at Scripture. So, and Orthodox Jews would say the Messiah is still coming.
But what about the prophecies?
They would say that the weeks here are just long periods of time.
So
they wouldn't take it literally. Right. So, but also during the Maccabean period, they were trying to calculate to figure out whether the book of Daniel was fulfilled in the Maccabean period. Also, because they declared Judas Maccabeus to be the Messiah or the Anointed One. And remember,
Right.
even the book of Acts refers to other deliverers who raised themselves up as Messiah, and even after Jesus, the Bar Kokhba revolt, he identified himself as the Messiah, and the Qumran community had the teacher of righteousness, whom they thought was the Messiah.
Has anybody done that in recent, say, last 500 years?
Done what?
Claimed to be the Messiah, to use that as a purpose for
Lots of
kind
people.
bringing the country together.
Lots.
Anybody that would be prominent? that
Well,
actually-
there was the prominent rabbi in New York that was assassinated several years ago, that they were all speculating that he could be the Messiah. So, and then of course you got your David Koreshes and others out there.
Right, but I mean, those don't really count.
Yeah. Samir?
All I was going to say, is during Daniel's time, after he had went back into the Torah and started studying, this is when he actually caught on to.
Well, it's interesting that Daniel caught on to it because he was reading Jeremiah. And Jeremiah he was doing his daily devotions, and he came across the passages in Jeremiah that spoke about the length of the captivity. And David knew the beginning of the captivity because he and his buddies went off into captivity in 605. You had 3 deportations. 605, the first one with Daniel and his friends, 597, other royals, 586, the entire population dispersed. And Daniel was able to, from Jeremiah's prophecy, to be able to go back and calculate exactly when the judgment upon the first generation was coming to an end. So Daniel got it from Jeremiah. Yeah. I mean, it's, really and truly, I'll probably have to fit in a Revelation class in one of these days, because it's some of the more difficult passages or books to understand. Romans is more difficult to comprehend and to fathom, but things like Daniel and Revelation are more difficult to understand. So we have this initial framework. Now, just to touch base again, let's look at our Matthew 24 passage and go down to verse 15. Matthew 24, verse 15. See what he says here. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So, you know that Matthew, under this revelation that Jesus is giving him, has Daniel in mind in Daniel chapter 9. Correct? Absolutely no doubt about it. Look over to Mark. Mark chapter 13, verse 14. The next page, 4. Because when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be. Now, Matthew specifically refers to Daniel. Mark doesn't. Why would Matthew refer to Daniel and Mark not?
Because he was lining up prophecy for the Jews.
For the Jews. Jews would have known Daniel. Gentiles wouldn't have known Daniel. So no need for Mark to mention Daniel, but good idea for Matthew to mention Daniel, just to take him back and cite the specific passage. When you come to Luke, Luke does not mention the abomination of desolation specifically, because this is going to be of less knowledge to the general Roman audience that he is referring to. So it's important, as we put the pieces of the puzzle together, for us to understand that it is Matthew and Mark that clearly tell us, you know what, Daniel is a framework here. Now, if you will look towards the back of your notepad, and I have a page 8 there. You see it says a structural outline of the Synoptic Discourses. First of all, in all 3 of them, there is the setting and the questions. They are on the Temple Mount. They are admiring the temple and the buildings. There is a prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem by Jesus. And then there are 3 questions that Jesus will answer. Secondly, All three Gospels have preliminary signs of tribulation. What we get from Matthew called the beginning of birth pangs, and we'll go through those in detail. Then there is an intensification of the tribulation and personal persecution. Part 3, then we have the major sign of the abomination of desolation and the destruction of Jerusalem with the resulting persecution. And then finally, the fourth section is the eschatological or end-time fulfillment with the coming of the Son of Man, or Jesus Christ, at his second coming. All three Gospels have the exact same framework for their end-time events. You can look at chart number 9. Textual parallels between the Synoptics and the Apocalypse, or the book of Revelation. The Gospels had the setting in the temple, and so does the book of Revelation. Then it has the beginning of the birth pangs, which we're going to see is Revelation chapter 6. Then there's unprecedented great tribulation, which we're going to see is chapters 7 through 9. Then there's the abomination of desolation and persecution, which is recorded in Revelations 10 through 14. And then there's the final judgment and coming of the Son of Man from 14:14 through 19:21. Again, we're talking about laying one schematic over another, and you find that there are these textual thematic parallels between all three synoptics and the book of Revelation. Now, look at page 10, the next chart I give you. And we're going to go back and try to prove that these charts are correct. If what I'm saying is true, what we end up with is this: the Synoptic Gospels and the 70th week of Daniel. The first half of Daniel's 3.5 weeks are the preliminary signs of tribulation in Matthew 24, 5 through 14, Mark 13, 5 through 13, and Luke 21, 8 through 19. First of all, there are the beginning of the birth pangs. Then Matthew says there is a time of great intensification. But he's going to tell us that this isn't the end. It isn't the end until you see the abomination of desolation. That's the thing that will be undeniable for them. The abomination of desolation and the destruction of Jerusalem. That is the midpoint of the tribulation. Then the second half, or the second 3.5 years of the tribulation, are the eschatological fulfillments of the coming of the Son of Man in the latter part of Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Now, I'll let you look at that for a minute. And then we'll put the next piece of the schematic together. Look at chart 11. Chart 11 shows you where Daniel, chapter 9, verse 27, A and B, as in the first half of Daniel's 70th week and the second half of Daniel's 70th week. In other words, the first half is the making of the covenant. The midpoint is the breaking of the covenant. And the last point is the destruction of the desolator. Notice at the bottom of page 11, the judgment of the beast, the false prophet, and all of the people after the second coming of Jesus Christ. Just as Daniel prophesied that the one who commits the abomination of desolation and desolates the holy place will be desolated at the coming of the Messiah, so the book of Revelation shows us at its conclusion that at the coming of Jesus Christ, the unholy trinity of the beast and the false prophet and the devil will be cast into judgment. Just while we're looking at the charts, chart number 12 gives you all the different dates for the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, when the Messiah is cut off, the date for the crucifixion, the beginning of the church on Pentecost, of course, the Balfour Declaration, which came out of the pre-United Nations that allowed the regathering of Israel to begin, and then, of course, the 14th of May 1948, when Israel was declared a nation. So let's go back to the Matthew passage on page 3 of your notes. Matthew chapter 24, verse 1. Jesus came out from the temple, and he was going away with his disciples. Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down." And he was sitting on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Now, we know from Mark and from Luke that the disciples were very enamored by the whole Temple Mount, and rightly so. Herod the Great had already, before the birth of Jesus, had been working on the temple for more than 40 years, 46 plus years. Even after Herod the Great died, Herod Archelaus, his son, continued the expansion. So really, there was almost 75 years of work going on the temple. And ancient historians and Josephus and others tell us how absolutely phenomenal it was. I mean, the tops of the capitals were overlaid with gold, and the doors were laid with gold and precious metals, and so on and so forth. Even today, if you get a chance to go to Jerusalem and you see some of these very ornate Corinthian columns that they had put up there, you'll see the little rusted gold flecks still on some of the capitals. That's why they had to burn the walls and why they had to overturn the stones, because how do you get gold off of a door or off of a capital or off of walls? Do you sit there and try to scrape it? No. You put a fire around it, you burn it, it all melts to the bottom into big nuggets. Then you tear down the walls, overturn the rocks, and you pick up the big nuggets. That's the fastest, best way to get the gold. And that's what they did. But they're very enamored by these buildings. And of course, the Mount of Olives is about 120 to 150 feet above the Temple Mount. So when you're sitting on the Mount of Olives, you have this bird's eye view where you can look right into the whole Temple Mount and see everything that's going on. So they want to know three things. When will these things be? That is, when's the destruction of Jerusalem? What will be the sign of your coming? That's the second one. And what is the sign of the end of the age? Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many." So there's going to be antichrists. "You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened. For those things must take place, but that is not yet the end." Verse 7, "For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all of these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. Verse 9, then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Now, I don't think that this is a reference to some kind of soteriological salvation. In other words, if you hold on to your faith, you hold on to your confession till the very end, then you're going to be saved. I think he's talking about delivered here, physical salvation. Those who endure to the end of the tribulation period are going to be delivered. Where are they going to be delivered? Into the millennial kingdom. Because that's what they're concerned about. Verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Verse 15, therefore, all right, he said to him, this is all the preliminary stuff. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in the house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babes in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath. What's wrong with winter flight? The problem is the winter is the time of rains. When the rain comes, the flash floods come. When the flash floods come, they cut off all of the escape routes. They fill all of the escape routes with water and floods and torrents, and it makes the roads impassable. Pray that it won't be on the Sabbath. Why? Because the Orthodox Jews, and they've done this in history, have rather than fought on the Sabbath and violated the Sabbath, they have allowed themselves to be murdered. Verse 21, for then there will be, what? Great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. Verse 22, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So, if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out there. Or behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, the powers of heaven will be shaken, and then the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the tribes of earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. He will send forth his angels with a great trump. There we have another trump. And they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the others. This is another one where mid-tribulationists or post-tribulationists will say this is the trump of 1 Corinthians 15. Now, they asked three questions. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the end of the age? He gives them, when will these things be? He says, these are the beginning of the birth pangs, then the abomination of desolation, then the great persecution. How do you know when I come? It's going to be from east as from west, flashing across the sky. I will be so visible in my coming. And what will be the end of the age? The end of the age will be when I send forth my angels and have that final great judgment. Now, if you look at Mark 13 and Luke 21, you will find parallel statements and parallel ideas that go all the way across. So, going back to our chart number 8, if you would. Going back to our chart number 8. If we divide Matthew up, you have the setting and the questions from Matthew 24, 1 through 4. Then Jesus gives the preliminary signs in Matthew 24, 5 through 14. False messiahs, wars and reports against wars, nations rising against nations, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, terror, and great signs in heaven. Now, look at your chart 11. The introduction of the 7 seals. Chart 11. We have a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, an ashen horse, martyrs under the altar, and then comes the great day of God's wrath. All right? Let's read now Revelation chapter 6 and see how Revelation chapter 6 lines up with what Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 have said. My thesis, or what I think you will see here, is this: that the 4 horses and the first 6 seals all follow exactly the beginning of birth pangs, the beginning of the signs that Matthew, Mark, and Luke said would be the first 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice of thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, this is simple and straightforward, but who breaks the seals? The Lamb. It isn't the devil breaking the seals, it's the Lamb breaking seals. And prior to the breaking of these seals, you have the thunder and the lightning and the earthquakes coming out of heaven, which before the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls are executed, every one of them has this kind of cosmic catastrophe that takes place. It's a sign that it's the judgment of God. Mid-tribulationists and post-tribulationists always have to say or argue that the seals are persecution from humanity or persecution from the devil, because they can't admit that the seals are the judgment of God. Because if they admit the seals are the judgment of God or the wrath of God, what do they have to do with their rapture? They have to move their rapture before the seals. Because God has not destined us to wrath, but to obtaining salvation. See, everybody agrees with that. That God is going to deliver the church from his wrath, as far as pre, mid, post, and pre-wrath rapture theories. All people that believe in a rapture believe that this is the benchmark. God's got to remove us before his wrath. Well, if you say it's after the 6 seals, then you have to say, well, that's not the wrath of God. But wait a minute. Who's breaking these seals? What lamb? Who's the lamb that steps forth to open up this judgment book of God? Of course, it's Jesus Christ. Ben?
this is kind of a little off, but so then how do you describe, or the question of, where's war from right now other than humanity's evil sinfulness?
Well, there's a couple ways. I mean, you can, for instance, go back to the principles of the book of Daniel, where you see that in the book of Daniel there are archangels, evil and good, that oversee the affairs of nations and that wage war. You can look into the book of Revelation where we see spiritual forces inspire or motivate or energize world dictators to go to war.
Huh. I didn't realize that. So it's basically you're saying then that we're protected from God's wrath, but not necessarily from these other angels' wrath, almost in a sense.
That's true. That would be true. Now, but not the church, though. You see, if the first 6 seals are God's wrath, and I think we'll demonstrate that they are, then the answer is that the church must be removed before these 6 seals are broken.
Right.
If the church isn't removed, then you have to redefine these seals as belonging to something else.
Right.
But even we see in the book of Revelation that God allows the devil to instigate nations into warfare to accomplish God's judgment and God's wrath.
He did that in the book of Job, so why should we be surprised?
We shouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah.
So Dr. Glenn, a short answer.
We
We need your answer to somebody who said all this took place in 70 AD and that there will be no rapture.
Right. Well, to say that all this took place in 70 AD is then to say, well, then why is there any believers today? Because if it all took place in 70 AD, then Jesus Christ must have come again. He must have taken all believers to heaven. He would have then come to earth and judged all non-believers. See, those who try to say that this was completely fulfilled in 70 AD have to spiritualize the second coming of Christ like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons have tried to do in the past, and to suggest that it was a spiritual resurrection, not a physical resurrection.
And some people are using Daniel and Isaiah and all the prophets to back up what they believe these days.
Well, yes. Believe these days in what sense?
Well, they're really pushing a 70 AD thing.
Well, there is the preterist view that says all of the book of Revelation and all of Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 was all fulfilled in 70 AD. The difficulty is, in 70 AD, we don't see the flashing of light from east to west in the second coming of Christ. You don't see all the details fulfilled. And I sat down a few years ago. I was actually asked on behalf of another seminary to sit down with some very, very prominent leaders in the, let's see, what's the denomination that works with the campus ministries so much?
Campus Crusade?
No, it's actually a church group. Great Commission churches. Great Commission churches are premillennial churches, but some of their top leadership have fallen in to what we call a historic preterist view, which is represented also by the Reformed theologian down in Florida, R.C. Sproul.
Yeah.
And if you take R.C. Sproul's view of end-time events and take it to its logical conclusion, he has to say that everything was fulfilled in 70 AD. The problem that you get with that is so I sat down with them to listen to their views and everything. I was asked to sit down with them because I'd done my dissertation on this particular subject and I'm a little familiar with it. And I listened to them actually say that all of Revelation and these Olivet discourses were fulfilled in 70 AD. My question to them is then, is there any future bodily resurrection? And their answer was, there's no coming of Christ and there's no future resurrection. Because if you say it all happened in 70 AD, you got no room for it in the future. That Jesus Christ is not coming to earth in the future.
So did you say the sinner's prayer was up?
Well, no, but I will give them credit in this. I said to them, I said, you're going to have to leave the denomination because you are absolutely at variance with the denomination. And if you're going to be honest with them and honest with yourself, you can't sign their doctrinal statement and you will have to leave. And it took another year and a half, but they chose to leave the denomination. So, but if you take that view to its full conclusion, it becomes heretical to suggest that the second coming of Jesus Christ in 70 AD accomplished the rapture, accomplished the divine judgments of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25 and everything else. And that from that point on, that there is no future bodily resurrection or gathering together of the saints or anything.
I was just saying that the apologetic right now that's on the radio, big guy, and he's really pushing that thing.
Who's pushing it?
I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
But
Well,
he's a great apologetic.
yeah, they're out there. I mean, I hear them bashing, premillennialists and pre-tribulationists like we don't have a brain, but
Well, when was Paul in Thessalonica? I mean, wasn't that post 70 AD?
no.
That was before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, let's now. So let's look at the book of Revelation as we work. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a loud voice and a thunder, "Come!" I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, a postmillennialist who believes that the church Christianizes the world and ushers in the kingdom, they'll say this particular person is representative of the church. Others will say, well, this is Jesus Christ. This is Jesus Christ coming and conquering the world in 70 AD. But if you compare this person to the person of Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 19, you see that they're similar people, but they are different people. And I believe that the proper interpretation of this white horse, this first horse, is that this is the Antichrist coming out and moving forward. And he is on a white horse like Jesus Christ. It says he has a crown, but it's interesting. It's a different Greek word than the crown that Jesus is wearing in Revelation chapter 19. So this is the Antichrist coming forth. And what's the first thing that Matthew says to look out for? False messiahs. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another red horse went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men should slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. What does Matthew say follows up? The false messiahs, wars, rumors of wars, and one nation rising up against another nation. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard him saying, something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." This is speaking of famines. Verse 7, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the four living creatures saying, "Come," and I looked at an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following after him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and with wild beasts on the earth. And so here you've got exactly what Matthew, Mark, and Luke are saying, famines and pestilences. Verse 9, when the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would also be completed also. Now, notice what Matthew says to them, that the disciples would be delivered to courts, that they would be martyred, that there would be all kinds of persecution and lawlessness. And that's exactly what the fifth seal is all about. Now to the sixth seal. and then we'll take a break and catch our breath to go into the 6th seal. He says, I looked, and when he broke the 6th seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind, the sky was split apart like a scroll when it was rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Verse 17, for the great day of their wrath has come. Past tense. They are recognizing that that great day of wrath has arrived, and who is able to stand? Certainly, by the 6th seal, no one can deny that the wrath of God has come and that it has been going on. It says, now, somebody like Marvin Rosenthal and Robert Van Kampen, who is passed on now, they try to take what is what we call an epistolary aorist here, and they try to say it's a futuristic aorist. There are times in Greek grammar when what is called an aorist tense can be used futuristically. The problem is that this aorist is used about 6 times in the book of Revelation, and always in the past tense sense. These kings, these slaves, these rich people are seeing these catastrophic events going on, and it comes to them, you know what? The wrath of God is falling down upon us, and they are going to try to hide from it. Now, what we're going to see is that the 6th seal, when you compare its prophecy that comes out of Isaiah and Hosea with the Gospels, it tells us that the sixth seal is the midpoint of the tribulation. That's the next thing we're going to try to quote-unquote demonstrate, is that the 6th seal is the midpoint of the tribulation. You can see on your chart how everything that Matthew says brings us right up to this period of the abomination of desolation. And those are all the beginning of the birth pangs. Now we're going to see that the 6th seal is actually the midpoint of the tribulation. So, any other questions right now that you have, or clarification? I've got you thoroughly confused. That's all right.